Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Josie's Point of View, where we focus on human interest stories from the Carolinas and beyond. Today's Saturday and it's July the 16th, 2022. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new to my channel, I'd like to extend to you a warm welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by. And if you're a returning viewer, by all means, thank you for coming back. I hope you find the information here to be informative. You know, I always say the tide changes so frequently here on these YouTube streets, so you always have to acknowledge where your support comes from. And I want you to know I sincerely thank you for your support. Feel free to like and to share this video, and don't forget to subscribe. And our story today takes us to the city of Fayetteville here in North Carolina. Take a look at the headline. And it reads, Fayetteville police kills a woman during a mental health crisis. I'll provide you with a summary here, and as always, I'll place links to a few of the full articles in the description box. So this story was breaking news on July the 2nd, and I waited for a few days until sufficient information was available, and also after the key players had an opportunity to share their frustration with the local police department in what continues to pan out as a failure of the local police to deal with community members who are having mental health challenges. Also, the summary of events by the Fayetteville police are being disputed by family members who were present at the time the incident took place. So I want to share with you what has been reported on this case, and I want to encourage you to stick with me until the end, because I'll share with you some comments from the community members, from healthcare professionals, and I also want to provide my personal take on the situation. So again, it was reported that police officers had shot and killed a young woman who was in a mental health crisis and threatening to harm herself. In an interview given by the assistant chief of police, he stated that the woman was holding a weapon for over an hour and would not release it. One report stated that the police were in fear for their lives. They said the young woman's daughter and her grandmother were in harm's way. And as you already know, there are always more than one side to the story. And the news reporters have indicated that the police did not provide a version of an accurate version of what completely led up to the shooting. They believe there are major gaps in their story. So I wanted to take a few minutes to present the other side of the story. I wanted to share with you the perspective from the victim's family members who were eyewitnesses to the event. That woman was identified as Jada Johnson, age 22, a single mother of a 2-year-old daughter. And before focusing on the incident that took the life of this young woman, let's go back by a few days and address some of the events impacting on her mental state at the time of her death. Reports say Jada Johnson had been in an abusive domestic relationship, and apparently things had gotten so bad that she sought refuge in a safe place, a place she had previously identified, and that place was her grandmother's house. But even at that safe place, the alleged abuser and some of his friends had allegedly been driving by the house and harassing her. Johnson was afraid for her safety and contacted her police for assistance. The police in turn suggested she should file harassment charges against that boyfriend and that she should seek refuge in a shelter, all of which the young woman was in the process of doing. So one thing remains undisputed. You have a young woman in need of a safe place, and then it appears that safe place was not really safe at all. So she reached out to her police department for assistance and then begins to do the things as she was instructed. And as some of you may know, when you're facing a crisis, things don't always happen as quickly as what others might like it to. But she was in the process of following through as she'd been instructed, and after filing those harassment charges, Jada Johnson apparently suffered a mental breakdown. Family members said the stress of what was going on had become too much for her. So facing a need for mental health intervention, the family was able to convince her to go to the hospital, and an ambulance was called to take the woman to Cape Valley Hospital, which is one of our local civilian medical center. But when the ambulance arrived, she did not want to go. And after a set of rather scary and unfortunate events, such as running under the ambulance and hurting herself, they eventually was successful in getting her to the hospital to be evaluated. And I mention these things not to sensationalize her illness, which is something I would never do, but I present these activities just to show that this young woman, Jada Johnson, was indeed suffering a mental health crisis. And during this time, the Department of Social Services, they were actively involved in her case. Now, all of this happened on Wednesday, June the 29th. She was admitted to the hospital where the doctors told her grandparents she would be hospitalized for a few days so they could evaluate her. But for reasons that are unclear, Jada Johnson was discharged from the hospital the following day, much to the dismay of her grandmother, who felt that, she said it was too soon, that she simply was not ready. They said the hospital sent your granddaughter home with sleeping pills and nothing less. And I guess the hospital realized she was sleep deprived, so they gave her some medical support to help her sleep. And some might say, was that really long enough for them to evaluate her? Was she sent home too soon? I'm not in a position to say. And keep in mind, it's not my place to criticize anything that the hospital may have done or could have done. I am simply reporting what has been published on this case. And later that night, after she got home, Jada Johnson was complaining once again that people were outside of the house where she was staying. She was still at her grandmother's house at the time. The grandmother stated that their home surveillance system showed vehicles previously identified by Johnson. They can see those vehicles on their surveillance system, and they stated those vehicles belonged to friends of her boyfriend. And by the way, the family stated that that surveillance video was later seized by the Fayetteville police. So now that I've given you some background information, let's return to the night of July the 1st. Johnson became fearful of the vehicle she was seeing outside her home, and she asked her grandmother to call the police. The grandmother stated when police arrived at the house, they, meaning the police, did not believe their granddaughter's story, and as a result, she became increasingly agitated. She showed them text messages on her phone and on her laptop, but it was questionable as to whether the police even took it into consideration. The grandmother stated that she even took one of the officers into another room to explain to him her granddaughter's medical condition, the things that she was experiencing, and that officer, she said, that officer is the one who killed the young woman. But we're not at that point yet. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. It was stated that an ambulance was called because Johnson had agreed to go to the hospital once more, but it was then canceled. Why? Good question. It was canceled because one officer indicated that he would take Johnson to the hospital in his patrol car. So let me interject here for a brief second. And this is my personal perspective on this. This never works. It just does not work. I've seen it happen right here before. It's just not the best approach. The individual is already paranoid. That individual does not trust the police. In fact, doesn't trust a whole lot of people and did not want to go in the police vehicle. Call the darn ambulance. She was not under arrest. Call the ambulance to take her to the hospital. Needless to say, she was not getting in that police car, and there was nothing they could do that was going to make her get in that car. And reports said the officers at the home went outside of the house to have a private conversation, and Johnson followed them outside requesting to know what they were talking about. And the reports said they told her their conversation was private. Now, that comment in itself did not help the situation, and when those officers got back into the house, all hell broke loose. The grandmother stated Johnson believed the two officers were conspiring to harm her, and when the two returned inside, Johnson pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and pointed it at herself. The grandmother stated Johnson pointed the gun at herself while stating, quote, "If you all don't bring my daughter out here, I'm going to kill myself," end of quote. The grandmother is insisting that her granddaughter never pointed a handgun at officers or at anyone else in the room. And at one point she was told if she put the gun down, they would bring her daughter to her. And she, meaning Johnson, placed the weapon on the ground. The grandmother stated they, meaning the police, kept at it. They just kept at it, not really sure what that meant. She said she expected that they would at least have tasered her at that point, but they did not. And then at some point she just went ahead and picked up the weapon again, and she moved to one side of the room as one officer kept on talking to her, and the other officer inched closer towards her. Now, based on the eyewitness report, which is the grandmother, and everybody acknowledges that this person was there throughout the entire incident, this contradicts what the police said because they said for that entire time the young woman had that weapon in her hand. And based on what we're hearing, that is not the case. She put it down and she walked away and they kept at her. They did not tase her. And eventually she kept on being agitated and she picked it back up. And as they were closing in on her, the grandmother stated that Johnson got on the phone with her boyfriend and began to negotiate for her life, for the life of her child, and for the life of her grandmother. With the boyfriend on the phone, the grandmother right there, and the police right there as well. They said she pleaded with him not to harm her family. She offered to commit suicide in exchange for the safety of her child and the safety of her grandmother. I have to stop here for a second because this simply breaks my heart. If there was question as to whether this woman was in obvious distress, here it is right here. There's no question. What I want to know, where were the mental health support providers? Because they weren't there. And it makes you wonder, could the outcome have been different? All right. But she was on the phone negotiating for her life. And then they said she asked her grandmother for a bottle of anything. And one of the officers told the grandmother, go get it. And after getting a bottle of medication and handing it to Johnson, the grandmother stated this is when one officer tackled the young woman to the ground. She still had the gun in her hand at this time. The grandmother stated the officer jumped on top of Johnson and she believed they knocked her out because she hit her head on the table, she hit the wall, and then she fell on the ground and she fell on her stomach. And after seeing this, the grandfather began shouting at the officer and he attempted to assault them. Of course he did. He seeing them hurting his granddaughter. And after seeing this, and him attempting to, I guess, assault the officers, they placed him in handcuffs. They placed him in handcuffs and placed him on the ground. They said it was at that point the officer rolled off of Johnson and a second officer shot her twice. They say 5 officers were in the house at the time. The grandmother stated one police officer came from across the room, about 10 to 12 feet, and fired 2 shots at her. Then for a second, she passed out. Seemed like she passed out. She was not moving. The grandmother stated she might have twisted. Oh, she might have, twisted a little bit because she had been shot, but she definitely was not moving. She said the officer then shot Johnson 5 more times in the back as she was laying on the floor on her stomach. The grandmother clearly stated there was absolutely no struggle. They simply murdered her granddaughter. Now, I want someone to try and explain to me how in the world could anyone say the shooting of this young woman was justified? How can that be? How can you say the police was fearing for their lives? How is it possible when you have 5 officers in a house, you have already shot her twice, she's lying on the floor, she's lying on the stomach, and then you go ahead and you shoot her 5 times in the back? How in the hell is this justified? One news reporter raised several questions, and I completely agree. One, she was in crisis. Was anyone trained to help? This is not the way you treat a patient or someone in a mental health crisis. Where were the mental health support system? Obviously, they weren't there. Now, the question, what prompted police to end the situation? Why is it all of a sudden you rushed her, you throw her on the ground, you shoot her twice, and then you think it's time to shoot her 5 more times? What the hell? This was not an animal. It was a human being. Another question, was police planning to arrest her? Were you planning to arrest her? Another question, why did Johnson have a gun at all? Very, very appropriate question. If she's having a mental health crisis, why was the gun in that house? Well, I could understand it being in the house. Why was it where she could find it? I do understand that was not her home. That was her safe place. But at the same time, why was the gun in a place where she can find it? But the reason, or the problem is not that the gun was in a drawer. The problem was that the officer shot her 7 times, shot her 5 times in her back as she was laying on the floor. So the city council and several other civil rights organizations have asked for the release of the body camera and for transparencies. I say good luck on that. It's just not going to happen. Just not going to be any transparency. We haven't had it in the past, and I certainly don't think we're going to get it now. And if you're wondering why there are no marches taking place right now, it's because the president of the Fayetteville chapter of the NAACP have asked for calm. He issued a statement stating, we understand the pain and anger of community residents over this horrific incident and the demand for justice as we face another police-involved shooting in the Black community, the statement said. Since the early accounts of the shooting do not contain all the facts surrounding the death of Ms. Johnson, we're urging everyone to remain calm and allow ample time for the SBI, the Citizens Review Board, and the Police Internal Affairs Unit to complete their investigation. And keep in mind, the police have left a set of gaps as far as what took place in that house. So we have to wait for the release of the body camera reviews and wait for everybody to complete their investigation, their assessment, and issue their report. But keep in mind, we are not going to forget about Jada Johnson. And it took the Fayetteville Police Department almost 2 weeks before they released to the public the names of the 2 officers who were directly involved in the killing of Jada Johnson. And as you can see from this article here, it was released on July the 13th, and this incident happened on July the 1st, so it took them 12 days. And what this delay does, it gives sufficient time to scrub social media sites for photos, etc. So if you're out there looking for pictures, you're just not going to find it. And when information was released, the only thing we were provided was the name of the officers involved. Now, I combined 2 different articles here, but the officers were identified as Officer Zacharias Borom, B-O-R-O-M, and Sergeant Timothy Rugg, R-U-G-G, and Borom was identified as the person who actually shot and killed Jada Johnson, shot her multiple times and killed her inside of her home. And you know, there seemed to be a lot of secrecy surrounding these 2 officers, and that really does not help to overcome the increasing level of distrust the Fayetteville community have for the police. All we're being told right now is that the officers are on paid leave until the investigation is completed. And funeral services for Jada Johnson took place last Friday, and that was Friday, July the 15th, right here in the city of Fayetteville. Now, amid the anger and frustration of a community seeking justice, the family shared their grief to the public through a small, intimate service that was held at the St. Patrick's Catholic Church here in the city. I was very surprised at the low level of coverage by the local news media. I guess they've moved on, but it just surprised me that a young woman having a mental crisis would be shot 7 times by the police, to include 5 times in her back as she was lying face down. She was lying on her stomach. It just surprises me that this type of coverage would be downplayed. But then again, as requested, the community is being asked to allow the investigation to run its course before taking any type of action. And while they were preparing to lay her to rest here in the city of Fayetteville on the 15th of July, in Chicago, they were also protesting the killing of Jada Johnson. And I'm not sure what the connection is, but I read in one of the newspapers that she was from Chicago. So there is a connection. I'm not really sure what it is. And this is the headline for one of the newspapers out here. It says, protesters want people to express their anger, grief, and love Saturday while calling for better mental health resources and community oversight of the police. And this is from a Chicago-based newspaper. And I think I'm going to pause here briefly because unfortunately this story is turning out to be much larger than I had anticipated. Normally I try very hard to keep my videos around the 10-minute mark, but I have exceeded that time limit and I must apologize to you for that, and I hope you understand. But there's so much more to cover. I really want to be the voice of this victim. I want to be the voice of Jada Johnson, and I want to make sure that I'm doing justice to the family, to the one who continues to grieve. Now, several new pieces were added while this video was being developed to include the release of a 911 call. There were at least 2 interviews by her grandfather, and I really want to cover those interviews because he was handcuffed on that ground and he watched them put multiple bullets into the back of his granddaughter. I really want to talk about what he wants, the type of justice he's looking for right now. So stay tuned for part 2, and I'll try to get it out to you within the next few days. And that's all I have for you right now. Leave me a comment below and let me know what you think about this video. And by all means, feel free to like it and to share it. And if you haven't done so already, I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel by clicking on that red subscribe button. It's on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click on the bell that looks just like this one here, that's the notification bell. If you click on that notification bell, you'll be the first to know whenever a new video is uploaded. I thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.